I'm Chloe. I was 28. I was making six figures in Manhattan. And I was 6 months away from marrying a man my future mother-in-law called a once-in-a-lifetime catch. What Hunter actually was expensive. He was expensive in the way some men are when they learn early that charm can cover laziness, and softness can hide hunger. He had the right face, the right voice, the right tailored coats, the right little pauses when he wanted people to think he was thoughtful. In photos, he looked like stability. In private, he was a leak. Not a flood. A leak. Slow enough that you don't panic. Constant enough that one day you wake up and realize your whole life has been warped by it. The night everything changed, I found a matchbook in the pocket of his wool overcoat. It was from a 5-star hotel downtown. The kind of place with marble bathrooms, silent elevators, and lobby flowers that cost more than most people's monthly car payments. Hunter had been telling me for weeks that he'd been stuck at the office late, buried under year-end reporting, pulled into last-minute meetings by his executive team. OT, he kept saying, like that one little abbreviation made him sound responsible instead of absent. I was standing in our apartment, one heel off, one heel still on, holding that matchbook between 2 fingers when Susan called me. Not to ask how I was. Not to ask if Hunter had made it home. Not even to ask whether I had time to talk. She called to tell me that since Tyler was finally trying to get his life together, it made perfect sense for me to help him buy a house in Westchester and clear his student loans so he could start adulthood without all that pressure. Then she said the number like she was discussing landscaping. $500,000. $500,000. She said it lightly, casually, the way people mention wine they want you to bring to dinner. And in that moment, holding proof that my fiancé was lying to my face while his mother treated my bank account like a family utility, I understood the real shape of my life. Hunter had betrayed me. His family had been feeding on me. And the biggest loss wasn't the wedding, or the relationship, or even the money. It was the years I'd spent mistaking access for love. If you've ever had that moment, the one where the whole emotional math changes at once, then you know how quiet it gets. Not dramatic. Not cinematic. Just still. A kind of stillness that feels like a lock clicking into place. That's what I felt. Because I knew, right then, that I wasn't going to scream. I wasn't going to throw the matchbook at him. I wasn't going to beg for the truth. I was going to let every one of them keep talking, until the truth cost them more than they thought I was worth. So stay with me through this. Because what started with a hotel matchbook and a $500,000 demand did not end with a breakup. It ended with paper trails, public humiliation, a civil lawsuit, and a set of flashing lights outside the house where they thought I was about to hand them a check. Hunter took the elevator up from our lobby 10 minutes later, loosened his tie before he got through the door, and gave me the exact smile people give when they think routine is protection. Long day, he said. I looked at him, then at the coat still draped over the back of the sofa. Looks like it, I said. He kissed my cheek. And just like that, the war started. Hunter and I met the way a lot of Manhattan couples do. At work adjacent velocity. We weren't in the same company, but we moved in the same orbit. Finance people, corporate people, people whose calendars looked like game boards and whose phones never really slept. We met at a fundraiser through a mutual friend. I remember thinking he seemed refreshingly unthreatening. Not flashy. Not arrogant. Not one of those loud men who walk into a room like it owes them witness. Hunter was easy. Easy to talk to. Easy to laugh with. Easy to bring into a life that already ran on precision. At that point, I'd already built the version of myself people like Susan later loved to call intimidating. I had the apartment. I had the title. I had the discipline people admire from a distance and resent up close. I'd grown up understanding that if I wanted real security, I was going to have to build it myself, in clean lines, through effort nobody romanticizes while you're doing it. So when Hunter came along with warmth and softness and an almost boyish ability to make hard days feel lighter, I let myself enjoy that. That was the first thing he took from me. Not money. Peace. At first, the imbalance between us felt small enough to explain away. I made more than he did. That was fine. I covered dinner more often. Fine. I was better with planning, bills, logistics, long-term thinking. Fine. When we moved in together, I paid the security deposit because his bonus was delayed. Then I covered a bigger share of rent because he was, in a weird stretch professionally. Then I helped with a credit card balance because he'd had a rough quarter and didn't want it tanking his score before we started talking seriously about marriage. Every time there was a reason, every reason was temporary. And temporary is one of the most dangerous words in a relationship because people use it to smuggle permanence into your life. If I'm being fair, Hunter never sat me down and said, "I plan to live off you." That's not how men like him operate. Men like Hunter learn to let circumstances speak for them. They let delay do the asking. They let disappointment do the asking. They let embarrassment do the asking. They let you volunteer your labor and call it intimacy. He'd say things like, "I hate that you have to carry more right now." And I'd hear decency. What he meant was, keep carrying it. Then there was Susan. If Hunter was subtle, Susan was not. Susan had the exact kind of polished suburban aggression that makes service workers brace themselves before she's even opened her mouth. Perfect blowout. Stiff smile. Opinions delivered like policy. She was one of those women who had trained herself to sound blunt, so nobody would call her what she really was. Controlling. At first, she loved me. Or rather, she loved the parts of me she could use. She loved telling people I was so driven. She loved mentioning that I worked in finance. She loved introducing me to her friends with little bragging details about my job title, my apartment, my work ethic. She loved the shine of me, the social value, the reflected status. What she did not love was the fact that I belonged to myself. So the praise always came with a second layer. "You're so organized, Chloe. Hunter's lucky to have someone who can keep him grounded. You're so good with money. I always said he needed a woman like you. You're practically family already, and family helps family." That last line showed up early. Earlier than I should have ignored. At first it was small. Tyler needed help reviewing a lease. Susan wanted my opinion on refinancing something. Hunter asked whether I could look over Tyler's budget just to help him get a handle on things. Then Tyler needed a little bridge support while job hunting. Then Susan started talking like my success had naturally created obligations I had never agreed to. Tyler was 24, and permanently on the verge of a turnaround. That was his whole personality. He was always almost getting serious, almost launching something, almost stabilizing, almost out from under his student debt, almost ready to stop needing rescue. And because the family treated his irresponsibility like a weather pattern instead of a character issue, everything around him bent to accommodate it. Susan talked about Tyler's loans like they were a tragedy that had happened to him, not a pile of choices followed by avoidance. Hunter defended him in this vague older brother tone that sounded compassionate, until you realized compassion was always being paid for by somebody else. Usually me. I didn't give Tyler huge sums in the beginning. That would have scared me sooner. It was groceries once, a flight once, a late payment once. Then a temporary card balance. Hunter asked if I could float because Tyler was spiraling, and Susan was already under enough pressure. That's another thing these families do. They rotate urgency. They move it around the room until nobody can tell what belongs to whom anymore. 1 month it's Tyler. 1 month it's Susan's stress. 1 month it's Hunter's bad quarter. 1 month it's our future. You're never just handing over money. You're supporting the family. You're investing in stability. You're being the calm one. And the whole time, the moral framing is doing the heavy lifting. I kept records because that's how my mind works. Not because I was planning a case against anyone. Just because I've always believed that if money leaves your life, there should be a trail. Transfers, notice, screenshots, confirmations, a digital spine, even in love. Especially in love. Back then, I thought it was a good habit. Later, it turned into oxygen. By the time Hunter proposed, most people around us thought we made sense. That's what kills me, even now. On paper, we did. I had the career. He had the likable face and social ease. I was structure. He was softness. He knew how to make himself look like relief. That's the trick. People trust whoever lowers the temperature in the room. They don't always ask who's been quietly setting things on fire in the walls. The proposal itself was tasteful, predictable, public enough to be witnessed, private enough to feel personal. A rooftop dinner, low lights, 24 white roses, Hunter in a navy coat, looking at me like I was the best thing that had ever happened to him. I said yes. And for a few months, I let myself believe yes meant safety. Then the asks got bigger. Once Susan realized marriage was real, something in her shifted. Not suddenly. More like permission had arrived. She started talking about the future, with this proprietary tone that made my skin tighten. The wedding, of course, had opinions attached to it. The guest list had politics attached to it. The gift registry had hidden expectations attached to it. Then Susan started bringing up real estate. Not for Hunter and me. For Tyler. She first framed it as a thought experiment over brunch. You know, she said, sipping coffee like she was discussing weather. If Tyler could just get into the right neighborhood, around the right people, his whole life could change. I smiled politely. That's nice. She kept going. He needs a clean start. Not another rental. Something solid. Something that makes him feel like a man. Then she looked at me. Not casually, deliberately. I remember that moment because it was the first time I felt the ask before she finished forming it. Hunter was there. He didn't interrupt. Didn't laugh it off. Didn't redirect. He just stared down into his plate and let the air change. Susan said, "You two are in such a strong position. I think when families are blessed, they should lift everyone together." I said, "That depends on what lifting means." She smiled. "Don't be defensive, sweetheart. I'm just saying, some help with a down payment now could save Tyler years of struggle." Sweetheart. That word in her mouth always meant she thought she was winning. I didn't say yes that day. I didn't say no either. I asked a few neutral questions, then changed the subject. But once a family like that smells hesitation instead of refusal, they treat it like an opening. After that, it escalated fast. Susan would send listings. Tyler would text vague gratitude in advance for support I hadn't agreed to. Hunter started talking about legacy and doing one big thing that changes the whole trajectory for somebody. I asked him one night, "Why does your brother's adulthood keep becoming my assignment?" He went quiet just long enough to make me feel harsh. Then he said, "That's not fair." There it was. Not an answer. A position shift. He didn't defend the ask. He made me defend my resistance to it. That was his real skill. He knew how to make boundaries sound mean. And still, even then, even with all that, I didn't know he was sleeping with Victoria. I only knew he was gone more. More late nights. More vague references to executive pressure. More "I don't want to dump work stress on you." More nights when he came home smelling wrong. Not lipstick. Not perfume, exactly. Something colder. Hotel air. Linen. Expensive soap. The kind of clean that doesn't belong to your own life. He started mentioning Victoria more often too. Always in a way that made scrutiny sound unsophisticated. She's a nightmare, honestly. She keeps me late for no reason. And she's one of those people who tests loyalty. He painted her as powerful, erratic, demanding. Which, looking back, was clever. If the truth ever surfaced, he already had the first layer of his defense in place. I didn't know that yet. I just knew the rhythm between us had changed. Trust doesn't always break in one sound. Sometimes it goes soft first. Like a floor warping under carpet. You don't fall through immediately. You just start walking differently without understanding why. The week I found the matchbook, Susan stopped hinting and started quoting numbers. 500,000. House plus student loans. Westchester, because Tyler deserves a place with room to breathe. She said marriage was the moment when priorities become shared, and if I really loved Hunter, I'd understand that helping Tyler was helping our whole family move into a new chapter. Our whole family. I can still hear her saying it, like she had already transferred me into their system. Like my labor, my money, my future were assets under management. That was the thing people never understand until they've lived it. Being used doesn't always feel like violence while it's happening. Sometimes it feels like paperwork. Sometimes it sounds like concern. Sometimes it arrives wearing family language and asks you to prove your love by financing your own depletion. By then, I was tired in a very specific way. Not weak. Just over-explaining myself to people committed to misunderstanding me. Still, some part of me was holding on. Some part of me still believed Hunter might snap awake if I forced the right conversation. That maybe he'd realize the line had been crossed. That he'd look at his mother, look at his brother, look at me, and finally say, enough. Then I found the matchbook. And suddenly the whole structure rearranged itself. He wasn't confused. He wasn't passive. He wasn't caught in the middle. He was feeding from two tables at once. He had me financing his life while he played kept man to a senior executive with a billionaire husband. Once I saw that, everything old looked new. That's the second pain and betrayal. The first pain is what happened. The second is what it changes retroactively. You don't just lose the present. You lose the innocence of the past. That night after he got home, I didn't confront him. I watched how easily he moved through the apartment. Watched how normal he wanted to seem. Watched him talk about some fake deadline while unbuttoning his cuffs. Watched the man I'd almost married stand in a kitchen I mostly paid for, and lie like it was just part of getting dressed. And for the first time since I met him, I stopped trying to understand him kindly. That helped. A lot. Because once you stop trying to rescue the person who's hurting you from your own judgment, you start seeing cleanly. And once I started seeing cleanly, everything moved fast. I hired a private investigator the next morning. Not because I needed emotional confirmation, because I needed proof that would survive denial. There's a huge difference between knowing and proving. Knowing helps you leave. Proving helps you win. The PI came recommended through one of the older women at work. Not a friend. Not exactly. More like the kind of woman who has been rich, divorced, and underestimated enough times to keep useful names in a little black notebook without ever needing to brag about it. I told her I needed discreet surveillance, financial discretion, and hotel verification. She gave me one name, no commentary, and went back to her lunch like she'd just handed me a good tailor. By the end of the week, I had my first update. Hunter wasn't just staying late, he was meeting Victoria off-site. Same hotel. More than once. Private entrance when possible. Valet records when not. Timestamps. Photos. Enough to kill every remaining lie he'd told me about overtime. The PI asked if I wanted him to keep going. I said yes. Because by then, what I needed wasn't a reason to end the engagement. I already had that. What I needed was scope. How long? How often? How careful? How stupid? Turns out, not careful enough. Not nearly. There's something almost insulting about how sloppy people get when they think you still believe in them. While the investigator worked, Susan intensified. That was the part that almost made me laugh. As Hunter's private life got more deceptive, his family got more demanding. It was like greed and infidelity were running on parallel tracks toward the same station. Susan called me twice in one day to circle back on Tyler's housing plan. When I didn't answer the second time, she sent a text. We need to make decisions like a family now. Then Tyler texted me a mortgage calculator screenshot. Not kidding. A mortgage calculator screenshot. No greeting. No context. Just numbers and a little message underneath that said, "This is what the monthly would look like with a good down payment." Honestly, life-changing. Life-changing. For him. Paid by me. I remember staring at that text at my desk, then opening another window with the PI's photos from the hotel. Hunter walking in wearing the blue tie I bought him. Victoria half a step ahead. One hand on the back of his arm, like she had every right. And I thought, amazing. The parasites are on a schedule. That Friday, Susan invited us over for dinner, which really meant a staged conversation with side dishes. I almost declined. Then I realized I didn't need distance yet. I needed theater. So I went. Susan's house smelled like roasted chicken and expensive candles and control. Tyler was already there, slouched in a chair, performing humility. Hunter was too smooth, too polished. Men lying about one thing often overperform everywhere else. He complimented dinner too quickly, kissed my temple at the wrong moment, touched my lower back like we were fine. Susan waited until plates were half empty to start. She always understood timing. "You know," she said, smiling at me over her wine glass, "I've been thinking about what legacy really means." I almost admired the patience. She'd upgraded from guilt to philosophy. Hunter kept eating. Tyler looked down, playing embarrassed beneficiary. Susan said, "You and Hunter are building such a beautiful future. Stable careers, real earning power. It would be such a blessing to help Tyler get his footing now." I said nothing. So she kept going. I found a property. Great school district. Safe, strong appreciation. If we move quickly, we can lock it down before spring. Then she named the number. $500,000. Down payment, closing support, student debt relief. All in one breath. Like this had already been approved somewhere higher than me. I looked at Hunter. He gave me the softest version of cowardice I've ever seen. Not pushy. Not ashamed. Just hopeful that I would take the blow quietly and make his life easier. That was the moment something in me became fully cold. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't argue. I smiled. Not warmly. Just enough. And I said, if that's what the family needs, then maybe we should talk specifics. Susan's whole body changed. You could see victory hit her bloodstream. Tyler looked up so fast it almost made me laugh. Hunter reached for my hand under the table and squeezed it like gratitude belonged to him. That right there was the betrayal inside the betrayal. He wasn't just cheating on me. He was also prepared to stand there while I financed his family's fantasy. That dinner ended with Susan practically glowing. She insisted we sit at the kitchen island so she could show me listings. Tyler started talking like he was already moved in. Hunter kissed my cheek on the drive home and said, "Thank you for being open." Open. I almost asked him whether he meant open-hearted or open wallet. Instead I said, of course. Because once people think they've won, they stop guarding their faces. That night, after he fell asleep, I sat in the dark with my laptop and went through every transfer I'd made in the last 2 years. Rent supplements, credit card balances, emergency loan to Hunter, temporary help for Tyler, vacation expenses Hunter promised to settle later, furniture, insurance, bridging costs, little things, big things, repeated things. When you spread exploitation out over time, it doesn't always look dramatic. It looks administrative. But add it all up, and the truth gets louder. By Monday morning, the PI sent me the file I needed most. Hotel footage. Not some grainy fantasy. Not some maybe. Enough. Enough to show Hunter and Victoria entering, lingering, leaving. Enough to destroy the fiction of overtime. Enough to prove pattern. Enough to survive tears. The file downloaded onto my laptop while I was on a call about fourth quarter forecasting. I watched the progress bar creep forward while my phone lit up with another message from Susan about Westchester Square footage. And something about that split screen felt so perfect it was almost generous. On one side, proof. On the other, appetite. That's when I made the decision that changed the whole story. I wasn't going to blow it up in private. Private would let them shrink it. Private would let Hunter cry in our living room and tell me it was complicated. Private would let Susan call it a misunderstanding. Private would let everyone reframe me as emotional and them as flawed. No. If I was going to burn this down, I wanted witnesses. I wanted timing. I wanted the lie exposed in the exact world Hunter valued most. His professional one. His polished one. The one where he still thought he was ascending. The company's holiday gala was 3 weeks away. Everyone important would be there. Senior leadership, clients, donors, board-adjacent people, spouses, phones, formal wear, maximum visibility. And Hunter, to make the whole thing even sweeter, was being recognized that night. Employee of the Year. When I found that out, I actually leaned back in my chair and laughed. Not because it was funny. Because it was efficient. He was going to walk onto a stage designed to validate his image. And I was going to use that same stage to break it. I didn't tell anyone what I was planning. Not friends. Not coworkers. Not even the PI. The less language around a thing, the safer it stays. I kept acting normal. Better than normal, actually. Calm. Thoughtful. Agreeable. I let Susan continue planning Tyler's imaginary future. I let Hunter believe my silence was forgiveness in progress. At one point Susan asked if I could prepare something symbolic, to show commitment on the house. So I wrote a deposit check, not one that would clear into their hands. Just one that looked real enough to quiet them and keep them leaning forward. I brought it to dinner in a clean white envelope. Susan opened it like she was receiving a coronation. Tyler actually whispered, "Wow." Hunter looked relieved. Really relieved. Like my compliance had lifted some invisible burden from his shoulders. And while Susan was smiling at that check, The hotel file was finishing its download onto my laptop at home. That might still be my favorite image from the whole story. Her thinking she had secured the money. Me already securing the ending. Here's the part people always want to know. Didn't I feel bad? Didn't I feel torn? Didn't I still love him? Of course I did. That's why betrayals like this work as long as they do. Not because the victim is stupid. Because love keeps trying to buy more time for facts that have already arrived. But by then my feelings had changed shape. I wasn't trying to preserve us anymore. I was trying to preserve accuracy. And accuracy required patience. That's something nobody tells you when you're dealing with manipulative people. Rage feels powerful, but patience is usually what wins. Hunter kept lying. Susan kept asking. Tyler kept acting like future equity in a home I would fund was a normal family conversation. I let them, because I had started to understand the real engine of this story. They did not fear my pain. They feared consequences. And consequences only work when the right people are watching. So I made a list. Proof of affair. Financial paper trail. Timeline of demands. Future legal exposure. And one more name. Richard. Victoria's husband. Billionaire investor. Controlled. Private. The kind of man whose silence gets translated by other people into whatever they most fear. I didn't know him personally. I didn't need to. All I needed was a way to make sure truth reached him before the gala. Not because I wanted him to save me. Because I wanted every layer of Hunter's life under pressure at the same time. That's when the story stopped being about heartbreak and turned into architecture. If you're still with me here, sit with this for a second and tell me what you think. When someone cheats on you, drains your money through family obligation, and still expects you to fund the next chapter of their life, is the affair the worst betrayal? Or is it the arrogance that made them think you'd never stop smiling? I found a clean way to get the information to Richard. No signature, no emotion, no pleading. Just enough to point him toward the hotel, the timing, and the right questions. Then I waited. Waiting is hard when you know something explosive. It gets even harder when the people who are betraying you keep asking for favors. Susan called twice that week to talk about Tyler's next steps. Tyler sent me a mood board for the kind of kitchen he wanted in the house. A mood board. I wish I were exaggerating. He wanted open shelving, natural light, and a breakfast nook. He also wanted me to pay for it. Hunter, meanwhile, started acting especially affectionate. That happens sometimes when cheaters sense atmospheric change before they know why. He brought flowers once. Asked if I wanted to get away after the holidays. Talked about maybe postponing some wedding decisions until work calmed down. Everything from him sounded like damage prevention disguised as intimacy. One night, he came up behind me while I was loading the dishwasher and wrapped his arms around my waist. "You've been quiet," he said. I kept my voice even. "Busy. You okay?" I turned and looked at him. Really looked. At the face I had once trusted enough to build a future around. "Are you?" He smiled, the way liars do when they think you're only circling the edges of something. "Yeah," he said. "Just tired." That word again. Tired. Men like Hunter love low-drama language. It gives them room to keep moving. I nodded like I accepted it. Then I kissed his cheek and went back to loading plates. He thought he had survived another moment. What he didn't understand was that survival was no longer the thing I was offering him. The gala week arrived under a kind of polished December tension. Midtown all lights, and cold air, and black cars. Our company world, not mine, his, in that strange year-end mood where people are exhausted and vain at the same time. Everyone wants recognition. Everyone wants visibility. Everyone wants to close the year looking more successful than they felt through most of it. The holiday gala was held in one of those Manhattan venues designed to flatter money. Gold light. High ceilings. Glass. Minimalism expensive enough to count as decoration. I knew enough about event systems and presentation flow to get where I needed to get. No, I'm not going to pretend I'm some movie hacker. I had access where I needed access. I understood timing. I understood how dependent those nights are on people assuming the files in the queue belong there. And once you understand how much corporate confidence depends on nobody checking the obvious, a lot becomes possible. By then the video was cut to exactly what mattered. No explicit nonsense. No vulgarity. Just enough. Hunter and Victoria entering together. Their body language. The unmistakable intimacy. The return visits. The shape of an affair without needing a soundtrack. I watched it one last time in my apartment, then closed the file. Not because I was nervous. Because I wanted my hands steady. At the gala, Hunter looked perfect. Black tux. White shirt. Calm smile. Everyone's hand on his shoulder. Everyone telling him congratulations before he'd even gone on stage. Susan had somehow managed to get invited through a sponsor connection, which of course she treated like destiny. Victoria arrived with Richard. That room changed a little when they walked in. Power does that. Not noise. Distortion. The social temperature recalibrates around it. Victoria looked immaculate. Controlled. Used to being watched. Richard looked like the kind of man who could freeze a room just by deciding not to speak in it. I stayed in black. Simple. Clean. Unmemorable on purpose. If I was going to drop a bomb in a room like that, I didn't want to look like the person who needed attention. I wanted to look like someone who had already moved on from needing to be believed. The drinks circulated. Speeches started. Applause came in waves. Then Hunter's award segment began. I still remember the exact pace of my breathing. Slow. He walked onto that stage grinning. There's no other word for it. Grinning. They read his accomplishments. They talked about leadership, reliability, growth, future potential. All the little corporate blessings people hand out when they mistake performance for character. I looked around the room and thought, none of you know him. Not really. But you're about to. He reached the podium. He thanked his team. He thanked mentorship. He thanked Victoria. And then the screen behind him changed. At first people didn't understand what they were looking at. That gave me maybe 3 seconds of silence. 3 beautiful seconds. Then recognition spread the way fire moves through dry material. Fast. Uneven. Total. The room went still in the ugliest possible way. Not quiet. Suspended. Hunter stopped speaking. Turned. Saw himself. Saw Victoria. Saw the hotel. Saw his whole carefully managed professional face rip open in public. Victoria's expression changed first. Not guilt. Calculation. Then horror. Phones came up all over the ballroom. Susan stood halfway out of her chair, with one hand over her mouth. Not because she was devastated for me, but because she instantly understood that status had just become debris. Hunter tried to say something. I don't even remember what. It doesn't matter. It was over before language could help him. Richard moved before anyone else in that room recovered enough to intervene. He walked up from his table with terrifying calm, mounted the stage, and hit Hunter once. Just once. Hard enough to send him down into a scatter of broken glass and dropped champagne. No one clapped. No one screamed. It wasn't that kind of moment. It was worse. It was the sound a room makes when everyone is privately grateful the disaster belongs to somebody else. Security rushed in. People started talking all at once. Victoria stood frozen for half a second too long, then went after Richard, hissing his name like she could still control the narrative if she caught it quickly enough. Hunter tried to get up, failed once, then got up anyway with blood at his lip and shock all over his face. Susan turned, scanning the room wildly, and when she saw me standing near the back with a martini in my hand, I watched realization enter her body like cold water. Not the whole truth. Just enough. I took a sip, and when Hunter finally found me across the room, I lifted the glass slightly and said, not loudly, not dramatically, just clearly enough for him to see it on my mouth. Merry Christmas, Hunter. That was the moment of full reversal. Not the punch. Not the video. That, because he understood then that I knew, that I had known, that I had not broken, that I had let him walk into the spotlight and thank his own destruction for mentoring him. The rest of the ballroom was chaos. The inside of me was calm. That's something I wish more women were allowed to admit without being called cruel. Calm can be moral. Calm can be the first honest thing left after somebody has lied to you long enough. Susan came at me first, of course. Not with apology. With accusation. What did you do? She hissed. I looked at her and said, I stopped helping. That line landed harder than I expected. Maybe because it was true in more ways than one. She started crying then. But it was the kind of crying manipulative people do when reality finally touches them. Loud enough to gather witnesses. Shaky enough to suggest innocence. Strategic enough to redirect attention from the person actually harmed. Hunter tried to get to me. But security was already between him and the room. Victoria was yelling at someone from legal. Richard had gone stone silent. The event coordinator looked like she wanted to disappear into the carpet. And me. I finished my drink. Then I left. Because the ballroom was the explosion. Not the ending. If you've ever watched someone lose the mask they spent years polishing, then you already know something important. Public exposure humiliates people, but it doesn't always correct them. Some people come out of a moment like that ashamed. Others come out of it desperate. And desperate people don't usually tell the truth. They reach for a bigger lie. That's exactly what Hunter did. By the next morning, I had 14 missed calls. 9 from Hunter, 4 from Susan. 1 from an unknown number I correctly guessed was a friend or colleague trying to triangulate the damage. I ignored them all until Hunter finally texted, "Please. You have no idea what really happened." That sentence told me everything. No accountability. No confession. No I'm sorry. Just an attempt to reposition the story before I locked it. He came home that afternoon looking like a man who had spent the night trying and failing to outrun his own face. He had a bruise forming under one eye. His lip was swollen. His suit from the gala was gone. He smelled like adrenaline, stale cologne, and bad decisions. He stood in the living room like he expected the wreckage of the ballroom to buy him softness. "Chloe," he said, "I need you to listen." I didn't tell him to leave. I wanted to hear the shape of the lie. So I sat down. He stayed standing. That felt right. Then he said it. He said Victoria had pressured him. He said the relationship was complicated. He said there were expectations. He said she had power over his career. He said it wasn't what it looked like. Then he escalated. He said he had felt trapped. That he'd been afraid to say no. That she had manipulated him. That if people really knew the truth, they'd see he was a victim too. There are moments in life when somebody lies to you so aggressively that the insult becomes clarifying. That was one of them. Because let me be very clear. If Hunter had said, "I did something ugly and I panicked," maybe some damaged human part of me would have still had to wrestle compassion. But that's not what he did. He reached for victimhood as strategy. He took the thing he had chosen and tried to recast it as something done to him. And suddenly the betrayal was worse than the affair. Because this wasn't just about cheating anymore. This was about character under collapse. I kept my face neutral and asked, "So you're saying Victoria coerced you?" He sat down then. Hard. Fast. Like relief had arrived. "Yes," he said. "Yes, that's what I'm saying." I nodded slowly. "And you'd be willing to say that officially?" He stared at me. I could see his brain trying to decide whether he'd found an ally. "Would you believe me?" he asked. That almost made me laugh. Believe you? After all that. I let my eyes soften just a little. Not too much. Enough. "If that's true," I said carefully, "then this isn't just a relationship problem. This is serious." He leaned in. That was the moment he stepped fully into the trap. When Susan came over that evening, she was already operating inside the same storyline. Hunter had clearly spoken to her, maybe on the drive over. Maybe through tears. Maybe through some half-scripted version of shame converted into self-defense. Susan sat on my sofa and said, "That woman used her position. I always knew something was wrong. Always knew." Amazing how quickly mothers like Susan become prophets after the fact. I sat across from them both and let them build the fiction out loud. Susan called Victoria predatory. Hunter said he'd felt trapped. Susan said this could destroy his life if he didn't take control of the narrative. Hunter said he hadn't known how to tell me. Then Susan looked me dead in the eye and said, "If you really love him, you help him fight this." There it was. Even now. Even after the gala. Even after the humiliation. My role in their minds was still functional. Helper. Buffer. Resource. Defense system. Not betrayed woman. Not person. Not injured party. Tool. So I gave them what they wanted. Or what they thought they wanted. I said, "Then you need to report it." They both went quiet. That's the funny thing about lies. People love saying them. They hate filing them. Hunter blinked. What? If she used her power over you, I said, then you don't handle that privately, you report it. Susan recovered first. Exactly. I looked at Hunter. Police, counsel, documentation, everything. If this is true, then you go on record. He hesitated. Just for a second. And in that second, I knew everything was about to get better for me, and much worse for him. Because hesitation is where truth peeks through. He knew what he was saying was false. He knew official language could come back to him. He knew that once a lie leaves the house and enters a system, it starts generating consequences beyond emotion. Susan saw it too, and did what women like her always do when male cowardice threatens the family script. She pushed. This is why women like her get away with it, she snapped. Because good men are too ashamed to speak. That did it. He straightened. Anger helping where integrity could not. You're right, he said. I should report it. I almost admired how quickly shame turned into performance. Almost. Over the next 2 days, I played the role they needed. Concerned fiancé. Steady voice. Controlled outrage. I told Hunter to write down his timeline. I told Susan to stop calling random people and let process work. I told them if they wanted this taken seriously, they had to be consistent. Consistent. That word matters. Because consistency is what liars fear most, once records begin. Meanwhile, I was talking quietly with a lawyer of my own. Not a divorce lawyer. There was no marriage yet. Not a revenge specialist either. Real life is less theatrical than that. Just a sharp, expensive attorney who understood fraud exposure, civil recovery, and the difference between emotional collapse and legally useful documentation. I laid everything out. A fair timeline, transfers, tasks, financial support, the $500,000 demand, the hotel file, and now, most importantly, Hunter's intention to formalize a false claim. My attorney asked the only question that mattered. Do you have records tying your financial support to acknowledgments from him? Yes, I said. How many? Enough. She smiled a little. That was all I needed. While she reviewed the documents, Hunter and Susan went to the police. I did not go in with them. I sat in the car outside for part of it, then walked the block and came back. When they came out of the precinct, Susan looked vindicated. Hunter looked shaky but relieved. He was holding paperwork in one hand like it was proof of moral resurrection. He got into the passenger seat and exhaled hard. It's done, he said. I looked at the paper, then at him, and all I could think was, you just converted your lie into evidence. That was the lowest point emotionally, by the way. Not the gala. Not the affair. That? Watching someone I had once planned a life with willingly drag a false accusation into an official system to save himself from consequences he had earned. Because that's when I understood that what I was dealing with wasn't weakness. It was rot. Still, I didn't break. I drove them home. Susan spent half the ride talking about legal strategy and optics. She actually used the word optics, as if this were a branding problem. At one point she asked whether I thought we should look into media exposure if the company retaliated. She said Victoria might settle just to keep her name out of things. Settle. As in, turn the lie into money. That's when the bottom really dropped out for me. Because now, the plan wasn't just to escape humiliation. It was to profit from fabrication. I went home that night and sat in the dark again, like I had the night of the matchbook, but I wasn't the same woman anymore. Back then, I was waking up. Now I was done hoping. That's a clean feeling, when it finally arrives. Not happy. Clean. And I want to ask you this because I still think about it. When somebody lies in private, cheats in private, and drains you in private, you can still tell yourself they're broken. But once they put a false story into the world on paper, and try to make the system carry it for them, what do you even call that? Fear? Desperation? Or the first honest glimpse of who they've been the whole time? The answer didn't matter anymore. The evidence did. Victoria's world started collapsing fast after the gala. Not because I orchestrated every part of that. I didn't. Because affairs at that level don't stay personal once money and image are involved. Richard moved with the kind of quiet brutality only rich men and good lawyers can afford. Within days, Victoria was off the board. Accounts frozen. Access limited, reputation in active freefall. The company went into damage control mode, and every ambitious person in her orbit suddenly developed ethical boundaries. Susan reacted to all this in the most revealing way possible. She didn't say, maybe we should slow down. She didn't say, maybe this has gone too far. She said, I still needed to honor my commitment to Tyler. I'm serious. In the middle of her son's public implosion, her fake victim narrative, and a senior executive's collapse, she still had room in her mind for the house. She called me one afternoon and said, Hunter is under unimaginable stress. The last thing he needs is uncertainty about family support. Family support? Meaning my money? I asked, are you still talking about the house? Her tone sharpened immediately. Don't act shocked. We had an understanding. No, Susan. You had a fantasy. And fantasies get expensive when you mistake another woman's silence for surrender. I told her I'd come by on Saturday, so we could clear everything up. She sounded relieved. That should tell you everything. Even then, she thought clarification would end in payment. Saturday came cold and bright. The kind of suburban winter light that makes big houses look especially staged. Hunter was already at Susan's when I arrived. So was Tyler. 3 faces waiting for money. Only I wasn't alone. My lawyer came with me. Small woman, precise suit. No wasted words. The kind of person who doesn't raise her voice because she doesn't need volume to alter a room. Susan opened the door, saw me, then saw her, and everything in her expression snapped tight. What is this? She said. I stepped inside. The conversation we should have had sooner. Hunter stood up from the dining room table. Chloe. No, I said. You've had plenty of turns. That was the first time I interrupted him cleanly. It felt excellent. My lawyer laid a folder on the table. Not dramatically. Just placed it there like a fact had arrived. Susan looked offended. Tyler looked confused. Hunter looked scared. Good. My attorney started with the financial summary. Amounts transferred over time. Dates. Confirmations. Shared expenses covered disproportionately by me. Emergency support. Debt relief. Card balances. Rent differentials. Payments described by Hunter in texts as advances, temporary support, loans he'd make right. Then she moved to the bigger number. $760,000. That was the recoverable total our filing was built around. Not every dollar I had ever spent. Not some emotional fantasy figure inflated for punishment. The amount we could document and substantiate. The room went very still. Tyler said, "What is this?" My attorney answered before I could. This is a civil demand for reimbursement tied to documented financial support extended under false pretenses and acknowledged repeatedly in writing. Susan turned to me like outrage could still save her. You're suing family? I looked right at her. No. I'm billing users. That shut her up for exactly 3 seconds. Then Hunter tried his last move. He said, "This is because of Victoria, you know what she did to me." My attorney slid another set of pages across the table. Printed texts. Time-stamped. Hunter initiating. Hunter flirting. Hunter asking for access. Opportunity. Private meetings. Hunter leaning into the relationship long before any later panic. Then more messages. Worse ones. Messages sent after the gala. Hunter trying to spin the story. Hunter discussing leverage. Hunter implying he could turn the situation into something financially useful if handled correctly. That was the part that broke him. Not because it was morally worse than the affair. Because it destroyed the victim's script. Once he saw those pages, something visibly left his face. Susan grabbed one and started scanning, then another, and I watched her go through all 5 stages of a certain kind of mother's grief in under 60 seconds. Denial. Anger. Blame. Confusion. Silence. Tyler looked from Hunter to me like he had just realized the house in Westchester had never been a dream. It had been a mugging with family branding. Then my attorney said the sentence I had been waiting to hear out loud. Your police filing creates additional exposure. Hunter looked up too fast. What? She didn't blink. The claim you made regarding coercion is contradicted by extensive prior and subsequent written communication. If investigators conclude the report was knowingly false, that carries consequences beyond this civil action. Susan whispered. No. My lawyer closed the folder halfway, giving them one last clean look at the structure of what had just happened. Affair, financial exploitation, false report, documentary contradictions. No screaming, no improvisation, no room left to romanticize anything. Hunter's voice went thin. Chloe, please. I almost hated that please more than anything else he'd said to me. Because it came so late. Late enough to prove it wasn't remorse. Just fear finally dressed in the right word. I leaned forward and said, very calmly, you let me pay for your life while you lied to my face. You let your mother price out my future like it was a family coupon. And when you got caught, you didn't tell the truth. You tried to turn a fake story into a paycheck. So no, Hunter, this isn't me ruining you. This is me stopping the sponsorship. That was the line. That was the mic drop. You could feel it hit the room. Not because it was clever. Because it was exact. And exactness is merciless when people have been surviving on blur. Then came the knock at the door. Not a movie knock. Not thunder. Just firm enough to end whatever fantasy remained. Susan froze first. Hunter looked like he might bolt, which was stupid. There was nowhere to go. One of the officers was already visible through the glass panel beside the door. Susan whispered, "Oh my God." No one moved. The second knock came. My attorney stood back. I stayed seated. Susan opened the door with shaking hands. The officers identified themselves, asked for Hunter, and stepped inside. I won't turn this into spectacle. That's not what it was. It was administrative. Question. Names. Acknowledgement of the prior report. A request that he come with them. Hunter kept looking at me like I could still reverse something. That's what people like him never understand until the very end. My kindness had always been real. Their access to it was what expired. Susan started crying, loudly now, asking if this was necessary, saying there had to be some misunderstanding, saying Hunter had been through enough. One of the officers, to his credit, stayed perfectly neutral. Hunter looked wrecked. Smaller somehow. Not innocent. Just smaller. The suit was gone. The confidence was gone. The ballroom version of him had died days earlier. This was the stripped one. The one without audience lighting. As they turned him toward the door, Susan reached for my arm. I stepped back before she could touch me. She said, "Please don't do this." And I said the last thing I ever needed to say in that house. Enjoy the new house. Just not the one you pictured. Then he was gone. Not forever. Not magically erased. Real life is slower than that. But gone from me. And for the first time in a long time, the silence after someone left did not feel like abandonment. It felt like recovery. Tell me honestly, because people split on this part. Do you think that was too cold? Or do you think there comes a point where the kindest thing you can do for yourself is let the law speak in the voice you kept soft for far too long? After that, things moved the way real consequences move. Not quickly enough to feel cinematic. Quickly enough to feel irreversible. There were filings. Response. Negotiations. Denials that got narrower over time, because facts leave less room than feelings do. The company kept its distance from everyone involved. Victoria disappeared from public view for a while, then resurfaced in exactly the reduced way people like that always do. Quieter title. Smaller circle. Forced humility nobody believes. Richard never contacted me. I didn't want him to. He wasn't part of my life. He was just one pressure point in a system that finally collapsed under truth. Susan tried calling me for weeks. At first frantic, then angry, then righteous, then wounded, then spiritual, which was new. By the end, she was leaving voicemails about forgiveness and how families survive hard seasons if people choose grace. Grace. That word from her was almost funny. Grace is what exploiters call the delay between causing harm and facing consequences. I blocked her. Tyler sent one message. Just one. It said, "I didn't know it was like this." I stared at it for a long time. Maybe he didn't. Maybe he only knew the version where money showed up and no one asked questions. Maybe being the designated dependent had kept him insulated from the uglier mechanics. Or maybe that was just another family story, another gentle lie built to keep the center from collapsing. I never answered. Not because I hated him most. Because he represented the whole trick too neatly. Need turned into entitlement. Entitlement turned into expectation. Expectation turned into moral claim. And somehow I was supposed to call that love. The lawsuit didn't make me feel triumphant. That surprises people. They expect revenge to feel hot. Mine felt cold. Cold and exact and overdue. The truth is, vindication doesn't always feel good in your body. Sometimes it just stops the spinning. Sometimes it restores proportion. Sometimes it hands pain back to the people who created it and says, "This was never mine to carry." I moved out of the apartment a month later. Not because I had to, because I wanted every room unhooked from him. There's a difference between surviving in a place and wanting to keep your peace there. I found another place downtown. Smaller, better light, fewer shared ghosts. The first night there, I sat on the floor with takeout and a glass of wine and listened. No phone buzzing with Susan's demands. No Hunter pacing around some new excuse. No background worry. Just heat in the pipes. Traffic far below. My own breathing. It was almost unsettling, how calm it was. Then it got better. People like to ask whether I still loved Hunter when it was over. That's not the right question. The right question is whether I still loved the person I thought he had been. Yes. For a while. That grief lasted longer than the anger. Not grief for him as he really was. Grief for my own mistaken translation. Because that's the deepest cut sometimes. Not that someone deceived you. That you collaborated with your own hope for too long. Because the alternative required such a brutal rewrite. I had to accept that the man I thought was gentle had actually been dependent. The man I thought was overwhelmed had been entitled. The man I thought needed protection had spent years living off my restraint. And once I accepted all that, I stopped asking the soft questions. I stopped asking why he did it. I started asking why I tolerated so much before I named it accurately. The answer wasn't weakness. It was conditioning. Women like me are taught that competence can absorb more than it should. That because we can handle stress, we should. That because we can solve problems, we should. That because we are less messy under pressure, we should keep being the larger person while smaller people keep taking chunks out of us. I'm not doing that anymore. That's the real ending, by the way. Not the police. Not the lawsuit. Not even the gala. The real ending is this. I no longer confuse my ability to carry weight with an obligation to carry other people's character defects. That changed everything. Work got simpler after that too. Not easier. Simpler. I stopped over-explaining. Stopped smoothing. Stopped managing emotional weather for adults who benefited from my patience. There's a version of me from before all this who thought being loving meant staying calm enough for everyone. The version of me after understands that staying calm is valuable only if it serves truth. Otherwise, it just becomes a nice room where manipulation gets to sit down. I canceled the wedding quietly. No dramatic announcement. No social media essay. No public healing performance. Vendor calls. Refund math. Guest adjustments. A life untangled by administrative means. There's something almost sacred about practical closure. It doesn't ask you to be noble. It just asks you to keep moving. A few people tried to tell me I should be glad I found out before marriage. I know they meant well, but relief is never the first language of near-miss devastation. Yes, I was lucky in that specific sense. No, that doesn't erase the years. No, that doesn't make betrayal a gift. What it does mean is that my life was not destroyed. It was corrected. Violently, yes. Publicly, yes. Expensively, yes. But corrected. And if that sounds too cold for a love story, then maybe it wasn't a love story. Maybe it was a debt collection with flowers wrapped around it. The last time I saw Hunter in person was months later, in a conference room during a legal meeting. He looked older. Not in years. In insulation lost. There are people who move through life protected by performance, until one day performance stops working, and then age hits them all at once. He was still attractive, technically, still polished, but the ease was gone. The invisible assumption that someone else would soften reality for him, gone. He tried to speak to me in the hallway after. I said no. Not rudely. Just cleanly. There was nothing left to discuss that facts hadn't already covered. That matters too. Closure is overrated when what people really mean is one last chance to renegotiate your boundaries in a softer room. I didn't owe him a softer room. I had given him years of that. Same with Susan. Same with Tyler. Same with every version of the family script that said my role was to absorb harm gracefully so their image could remain intact. No, I'm done financing intact images. And that's probably the one sentence I hope somebody listening needs tonight. Because sometimes the most expensive thing in your life is not the money you gave away. It's the story you kept paying to believe. Mine cost me time, trust, a future I had already decorated in my mind. But it also bought me one brutal, lasting education. You can love people and still owe them nothing once they start using love as a billing system. I sleep better now. That's not poetic. It's just true. I sleep better. I eat dinner without waiting for somebody else's mood to arrive. I make plans without calculating how much emotional labor they'll cost. I don't flinch when my phone lights up, and maybe most important, I no longer mistake being needed for being cherished. Those are not the same thing. They never were. If you're listening to this and you're in that gray area right now, not fully betrayed yet, not fully free either, I need you to hear me clearly. Pay attention to patterns, not apologies. Pay attention to whether every crisis in their life mysteriously ends with your labor. Pay attention to how their family talks about your success. Do they celebrate it? Or do they mentally assign it before you do? Pay attention to whether boundaries make them reflective or offended. Pay attention to whether love in that house always seems to come with invoices. And above all, pay attention to what happens when consequences finally show up. That's where character stops hiding. Hunter didn't become a liar when I exposed him. He became visible. Susan didn't become manipulative when the money stopped. She became audible. Tyler didn't suddenly become entitled when the house disappeared. He just lost the cover story. As for me, I didn't become cold. I became exact. There's a difference. Cold is when you stop feeling. Exact is when your feelings finally stop editing out the truth. So here's what I want to ask before I leave you with this. If you were me, would you have exposed him the second you found the matchbook? Or would you have waited and let him keep building the lie until it collapsed under its own paperwork? Have you ever been treated like the stable one, the generous one, the one who can handle more, while somebody else quietly built their comfort on top of your restraint? And with a betrayal like this, not just cheating, but lying, using family, and weaponizing false victimhood, do you believe forgiveness is still noble? Or do you think some people only learn the truth when access, money, and image all disappear at once?